don't like being here. I felt betrayed. And also the whole thing was very exotic. The other thing that was terrified me when we came in the 50s, there was this phrase, the melting pot.
Oh, it's scary.
You didn't want to be melted.
Melting pot. You come here, and I had this vision, sort of like the Struwwelpeter thing, that you're being thrown into this boiling pot, looking the way you are, and you come out looking like everybody else. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
I was really, despite all the other things, I participated in school, I was really successful in high school and sports, but deep down I had this feeling. So anyway, so anything, you did anything to avoid the melting pot. Dates, proms, study halls, skipped them out and went to movies instead, right? Dressing like everybody else, crew cuts in those days, just mentioned it.
Well, the Midwest is much more conformist in that way. You've probably noticed, though,
It was very much in those days, yeah.
Basically, sort of old money is the only, old white money, are the only people allowed to be certified eccentrics, because the immigrants were supposed
Or
to
if you were a DP.
Or a DP. Or some Jews. Some Jews with money did eccentric things. But essentially, that was the...
So anyway, so my family, for example, I never spoke to my parents in anything but Latvian. As long as we lived together, or as long as they lived. I would thought it insult them to speak to them in English. My sisters, on the other hand, spoke to them in English. And my father, very readily, he liked English. He picked up all these catchy phrases and all that he liked to use. He had no problem with it, but I did. So consequently, like for example, we never celebrated Thanksgiving. That's about the only kind of American festivity that you really had, right?
Distinctive, yeah.
4th of July.
Your family gets, yeah, we didn't until I had left the house. And I always thought it was an honor of me.
Now, do you think you have your slight accent because you spoke Latvian to your parents? Or
Oh, absolutely. For example, that's an interesting point. One thing, I was a little older than my siblings. My siblings have no accent.
Mm.
I have a sister, my oldest sister, who was 2 years younger, ended up living in the South, in Oklahoma. So she had a Southern accent, a little bit. But none of my other siblings have an accent. Yeah,
so you're a willful,
because
willful
I told you I really didn't like being here, and for there was this period I didn't speak English. I refused to speak it. At the same time, I was studying trying to memorize the dictionary. Did I tell you that?
No, I didn't know that.
I thought the only way I'm going to get this language straight is if I started reading and memorizing dictionary from A to Z. And I got to B.
DP.
No, to B, not to B.
Right. Now, but you were telling me that you used to mouth off, as we say in this country, mouth off. You were an unruly, talkative, obnoxious child until you heard yourself, your actual voice.
Yeah.
So presumably you were participating by that point. How old are you then?
Oh, when this thing happened, I'm pretty old. I'm at the end of high school.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No,
So
at one point I
point-
just gave up and I went with the swim, but in my old with the flow.
Yeah.
In the swim.
In the
swam
swim with
flow,
flow, yes.
but with my old crawl.
Yeah.
Forward
I'm
backstroke.
adding this to your repertoire.
Forward backstroke. Yeah, no, good point. But I was, I'm still cringe when I think I'm out of embarrassment.
So was this a language lab, or how did you come to be recorded? Your voice?
How it became recorded?
Yeah.
I was, let's see, kind of interesting. I think it must have been the last year in high school. at the end of the 11th grade, we were going to sign up for courses, and the high school was going to offer a creative writing course. This is in the late 50s. And I thought, wow, they're going to make me a novelist here. And I signed up for it. I was looking really kind of forward to it. And they didn't get enough people to sign up for the class. Can you believe it? They only needed like 12 out of this high school that had 600 students.
Of course, you're expecting us to publish our thing. Nobody's interested.
So instead, my counselor said, you know, they have this speech class. And it's the same kind of thing. You can do you're going to... So I did. That's how I ended up there.
And then they
played
recorded
it back to you at some point? They played it back to you at some point, is that...
Yeah, right. They asked us to do a little thing, and then a week later they played it back. And...
But other people didn't think you sounded dreadful.
No,
You just thought,
of course not.
They were used to it.
Oh, no. I think most of my peers, sort of, I think that's what you call them.
So to speak.
So to speak, yeah. I think they liked me. I had a very, like, high school for me was not, Americans usually say high school is something awful. I don't know if it was for you or not.
Well, I changed school 3 times. I was so dire.
I was bored, I didn't like it, I hated my classes, but it was no big deal. It was sort of fun to go to school.
Yeah.
Well, I always had the sense that it was like being in prison. And basically, that when you became 16, you could leave the school. So I always had the sense there was an ending to my sentence. So I didn't really feel it was...
Oh yeah, that pretty much. I think that's pretty much how everybody felt,
Yeah.
except there were people who really thrived in high school.
Yeah.
There were these girls running for government all the time, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I wasn't one of them. But
I had one of my oldest sister ended up being the homecoming queen.
oh,
Wow.
She was really very striking looking creature, but she worked on it. She actually promoted herself. It just happened that she did it. I mean, she had this whole clique of girls. But
So she became quite Americanized.
Not really. She was kind of individual. She's ended up kind of tragically. She had an aneurysm about 4 years ago. And she's sort of semi-invalid, living with her sister, with her daughter. And meanwhile, her husband died. And, yeah, kind of a sad story.
So where is she?
In Florida right now. But how did we get into these nettles?
you're talking about the dictionary and
No.
learning English.
I think you do this deliberately to make sure that Anne records this. I think your hoots here setting me up.
No, we're not good.
No, I can't. You started the whole thing, Egil.
No.
You said, did I ever tell you about... Yes, you said how awful America was when you were
Oh, the
arrived.
melting pot.
The melting pot and how you hated the melting pot.
yes, about
And
the
then
melting
I
pot.
pointed out, and then you said you would not, you didn't speak at all. And I pointed out, like the Medieval Academy secretary, that you had previously said that actually you did mouth off all the time, and then you explained that was later. So you arrived at 12, age 12 or something? Is that
No, I was almost 16.
So you arrived at 16 and you didn't
I
speak.
turned 16 when I came.
Aha. So you didn't speak. So it's really just a couple of years. By 18, you were mouthing off all the time. That's
Yeah.
the speech class.
Yeah.
So actually, we had this
Yeah.
brief. Yeah. Well, melting pot is an idea that's pretty much. It was from the era of 1850 to about 1960, and. I don't think we're trying to melt anymore.
Try to.
We are not trying to melt anymore.
Oh, the melting, yeah. Now, I don't know, it occurred to me because I think that we started talking about these DP things, which I hadn't really done for years. Yeah, the melting pot was a horrible concept. And they were proud of it.
I know. But notice, to the elite, previously existing Americans, they didn't have to melt. So old-fashioned New England Yankees they were the real thing.
Yeah.
And when the immigrant came in, you just melt them all down, and they become sort of like you.
Yeah.
And that's the idea. So it's a comforting, de haut en bas, patronizing way of looking at it. And of course, it's influenced hugely by the fact that when the first settlers came to Massachusetts and stuff in the 17th century, there were small villages, there were just these, once you suddenly start having New York City with, 2 million Eastern European Jews arriving in a decade, you need to have some sort of way of thinking about them, conceptualizing them, because they aren't going one to each village. If you look at early history, for instance, of Jews in New England, Ezra Stiles, the founder of Yale, was a great Hebrew scholar, and there was actually a synagogue in, maybe not New Haven, but Newport, Rhode Island or something. So you had a certain small dispersal, and you didn't worry about melting pots, because basically they were setting up institutions like yourself. So it's only when you have too much food that you need to melt it in the pot. Yeah, it's a distasteful. It's also got that, I never liked Sherwin-Williams paint. I don't know if you've seen Sherwin-Williams. Covers the globe.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
This horrible thing.
Right.
This paint is going in and I always just thought.
Yeah. Yeah, as soon as you said it, I just saw it.
Yeah, that's the same sort of yuck factor. Mm. So I want one question apropos of your education. So you dropped out of as a grad student in philosophy at Ann Arbor, and you went to New York. And to be a social worker thing, you had just having a BA was sufficient.
It was interesting. I keep thinking about how difficult it is these days for people to get to work, to job. Well, these early 60s, we're talking 68 at this point. I dropped out of grad school in 66. The fact that you had a degree more or less enabled you to do anything.
So just a BA?
Yes.
What?
I mean, the point that you had had a college degree, at that point maybe 30% of people just went to college. Yeah, I remember going to New York, and there was all these places where you could work in business. At that point, everybody was computerizing. Like the New York Times would have work ads that were this thick. I remember one Sunday, the New York Times, probably like 67, probably 68, was a 6-pound edition of the paper, and mostly it was ads for work. Okay, so the choices for me were, I would go into computers as a trainer, being trained mostly by bank or big businesses. And there were pages of want ads for this.
But you knew nothing about computers.
No, they didn't need anything. The fact that I had studied philosophy would have been a plus. All you needed was a BS, a degree. And of course, computers, even in those days, was something creepy. I mean, there was this, can't even remember if they existed or not, or what they did. But that was when I actually thought of maybe doing it once I went to Europe, couldn't need a job.
They were large. They weren't domestic machines. They were rather like an autoclave in a hospital.
Yeah, but they were training programmers at that point. And it was immense. I mean, really, pages and pages of ads in the New York Times every Sunday. Trainees. And in other words, you just went there and they took you.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you not end up as a computer?
Well, I didn't want to do that. So the other thing was the social work thing. And at that point, what you had is this leftover institutions of welfare. There was home relief, left from the
1880s
times, right? Aid to dependent children, which is a big thing. And there was also the Johnson's War on Poverty. So they were being given increasing funds for all of this. and they just needed what was at that point called caseworkers. And I just went, took this little exam, it took 10 minutes, and a day later I got this job I was stuck with. And first I was just a welfare evaluator. In other words, people came to apply for welfare, and I just did the little things. I did that for 6 months. It was very boring. And then there were some changes involved in what they were going to do, whatnot. And I just volunteered for the child abuse thing.
And so
And they were willing to take all. And the fantastic thing about this was there was no training. I had absolutely no idea really what you were doing. And what had happened in the late 60s, first of all, like in the late 50s, remember America discovered there were hungry people. What was Harrington's book? I remember it was
Famine and something or other. Isn't famine in one of the...
No. There was really big, and the Americans discovered there were people actually that were poor here and living in hunger. And that was
History and Hunger.
No.
Hunger
It
and
was
History,
something
no?
more popular kind of thing. Still remember the paperback lasted for 20 years. Michael Harrington.
Oh, do we look it up?
Something about poverty or...
Michael Harrington.
Progress in Poverty? No, that's Henry George.
Michael who?
Harrington.
H-R-R-I-N-G. Well, anyway, so, and then the war of poverty started because of that in Lyndon's administration. And then little later after that, they also discovered that the children were being abused and neglected. It was like this middle class discovers that there are awful things going on in this country. So legislatures passed all kinds of law. And in New York State, they passed a law that they established a clearinghouse. Anybody can call in and report that a child is being abused or neglected. And the state will investigate that. And policemen, doctors, and teachers are obligated to report any suspicion of that.
And these
So
could be
all of a
anonymous.
sudden you had all everybody was... Anyway, so I got stuck with that.
And of course, any time that the work is a little slow, you could just make anonymous calls or have friends call in, and
Yeah, you could. I mean, you didn't have to identify.
you could say there's some child abuse down at the Friends of the Berkeley Public Library book sale room, and zoom down and
Yeah.
investigate it.
Yeah.
So how long did you last with that? How long did you last with the...
I did 10 years.
10 years, wow.
Yeah.
And at that point, did you want to just leave New York, or had you had enough of your job?
Difficult to say. It was sort of getting to be overwhelming. It was, I was sometimes terrified to go. We would get a case, usually in the afternoon, and it was serious enough they had to be investigated in 24 hours, which meant they had to go the following morning very early. And New York was under the heroin epidemic in those days, and the slums were terrible. The city was going bankrupt. And it was just scared to go there. And I think I told you last time, I went always by myself.
Yeah.
And the night before, I simply couldn't sleep. I would drink 6 cans of beer, just kind of not to think about anything. And so it was horrible. And towards the end, it was getting worse and worse. And I had a murder. I had assigned a case. And I tried to get and see and visit the family. And by the time, while I was in the process of doing it, it took me about 10 weeks, the child was murdered. And it turned out that it was somebody's active case already. So that person got into real trouble, and they completely ignored me. And I could have saved it. I think that did it.
So it was a case that was already being investigated,
Yeah.
and then you came in at the end?
Well,
somehow?
remember these complaints are anonymous.
Right.
And they're not remember, this is like the 70s, so there's no computerized thing, doesn't look up the same address
Right,
as
right.
being, so you just,
Overlap the,
Yeah.
yeah. Terrible.
Was there a
and at
fair
that point, yeah, and then, let's see, that happened, and it was just like, I just couldn't figure out, my first wife was going to graduate school, she was doing really well, she was really a fine woman and very intelligent and smart, studying Chaucer. So here I am, a child abuse investigator, I am a Chaucer scholar, taking classes with Irving Howe, Irving Howe, right? I even talked to him on the phone a couple of times. And I was trying to do photography, which I kind of did seriously, but it was very hard to work all this and then have a little time. And then sort of towards the end of this, I met Barbara, which is another completely other story. And she saved my life in the sense of enabling me to kind of quit the job and quit New York.
New York is kind
I
of an
always
addiction.
regretted quitting New York, but not the job. But they kind of went together at that point.
Was there a fair amount of burnout among other employees?
Yeah, be it suicides. People were actually attacked, stabbed while investigating. I told you we're going to throw the
The
baby
baby,
out
yes.
the window. Yeah, and even on my floor where I lived, 3 people committed suicide while working. We're not really sure whether it was the job or something, but it can't have been a coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this California job is an upgrade from...
Oh, this is, if I had this job when I left my graduate school work, I would have accomplished a lot more. And I lived a boring life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely, the job that's just made...
Well, the old classic remark about, these will be things to look back on in the future with, fond memories or interesting memories. You've obviously got that.
Yeah, actually, part of all these things happen so that you can remember. Otherwise, your life is, I don't know, but it's filled with more things. I think your things are filled out with books. Well, also things happen to you.
An occasional disaster.
Well,